Okay, so I wanted to do this video basically on North African people, Middle Eastern people, European people, the Caucasian race in itself. People act like there's such an aversion to what the Caucasian race included originally in some people's minds, I find. Some people act like the white race belongs to the pure European race. Some people think that. And the reason they think this is because of the association with European people, I think. More than what actually the Caucasian race originally included. It had nothing to do with specifically European people, but people who all shared the same physical traits that made them a part of the same race. See, race was always defined by facial features. This is why when you think of Asian people, East Asian people were never split off because of their skin tone difference. They're very dark Asians, they're very light Asians, right? But nobody divides Asians racially. You don't say that, dark Asians and light Asians are different races. We don't say that black people are different because of their color. We don't. And racially, it's never been that way. See, the Negroid race, it always included Igbo people, and it was well known that Igbo people and Central Africans were very light-skinned, but they were always Negroid. The thing is, when we deal with white people, people get very uncomfortable with this because they don't want a color range among white people, because they feel like that diminishes the white race. Because in their minds, they still have an idea that white is better. So white has to have a special criterion. When the white race and the Caucasian race, it's just another category, another racial category. That's how I feel. I've always felt the white race, the Caucasian race, which is what it really is. It's just one particular criterion. And that criterion has nothing to do with skin tone. There are dark Caucasians that are very dark skinned, like very dark. And there are very fair-skinned Caucasians. People are used to seeing fair-skinned Caucasians, but there are very dark-skinned Caucasians as well. The Caucasian race never just included just European people. And the Caucasian race was actually more inclusive than other races if you look at it. The Negroid race never included mixed people, but the Caucasian race included mixed people. Because race was always more defined on phenotype and ancestral connection, as long as they had an ancestral connection. But it never actually had to do with if you were purely of Caucasian stock. This is why you will find with the Caucasian race, there are people in South Asia that are included with the Caucasian race. There are people in East Africa that are included in the Caucasian race. And there are people in the Sahara that are included with the Caucasian race. All these populations, including, I'm saying, the people in the southern Sahara and areas, all people are basically included in the Caucasian race. People of the Saharan race who are particularly North African descent, like the Tubu, the Fula, the Tuareg, the Gawa, the Danakil, or the Nubians. are all people who are included in the Caucasian race. They're included in the Hamitic portion of that Caucasian race. And the South Asians are also included in the Caucasian race. Middle Eastern people are obviously included in the Caucasian race. They are a part of the Semitic race. North Africans who are... So it's like North Africans are definitely Caucasian, right? By the census, Middle Eastern people, North Africans, and European people are included as Caucasian. Black is defined by being sub-Saharan African. People will try and lift this and try and say people of the Sahara are black Africans, which is weird because it's like, how can we be black Africans if we're not sub-Saharan African? It's weird to me. I mean, like, if you're not sub-Saharan African, obviously you're not black. That's just the fact, okay? You know, so people native, and I know people are going to bring up black immigrants to the Sahara, but black immigrants to the Sahara actually have a genetic affinity and connection to the people in sub-Saharan Africa. They don't particularly have a connection to the people north of the Sahara. People who are native to the Sahara have a connection to the people north of the Sahara. Therefore, that's why they are called Caucasians. Because, one, phenotypically they have the cranial structure for being Caucasian. People will always point to darker skin, which is weird because we're talking about the Sahara Desert. And the Sahara is a very harsh climate. It's very sunny. It's got a lot of sun exposure. This means that most of the time the people in these areas and in this climate are going to be much darker than what they naturally are. So they use the climate as a reason to say someone is black. Tanning someone's skin, or, you know, are we saying the people who get, like, skin injections to look darker, for example, of white people, are those people now black? So we really are giving credit to people who are, like, transracial, who are trying to make themselves look like black people, to be black people because their skin is dark? Because this is the same idea here. These people naturally aren't dark, but because of the sun exposure, they are darker. People will use this as a reason to say that they are dark and that they are black, when that's not the case. You know, many of these people, skin tone-wise, would fit into either skin tone 1 or 3. I mean, 1, 2, or 3. Maybe 4 in skin typing, basically. And having melanocompetent skin types makes you susceptible to brown easily and to get dark easily. But if you understand anything about skin types 3 and 4, you understand that the natural complexions of us people, when we have skin type 3 or 4, is actually a very light complexion. I can say this for myself. I remember there was a time when they needed a study, they had a study out for fairer-skinned individuals, and people like me could easily do studies like this because of our skin tones being lighter in our unexposed areas, even though we have much darker skin in our outer complexion, which could be comparable to a browner, more dark black complexion like skin types 5 and 6. But that's not natural, see? So you can't even say it's comparable, even in that sense. But my point is, in this conversation is, I don't get why people are always trying to say that Caucasian people are only relegated to people of Europe when, honestly, the Caucasian race has always included all the people that were included with the Caucasian race, which is Middle Eastern, North African, European at its minimum. But then there's also people of East Africa and South Asia who are actually technically Caucasian racially. When you look up the Caucasian race, these people are always included. And the reason that East Africans are included is because when you really think about it, if an East African person is white-skinned, they will look like white people, Caucasian people. This tells you that racially they are the same. Do this trick on many black people. Turn their skin white, will they still look white? And I can assure you they won't. We've been through this plenty of times with albinos. Albino black negroid people look like albino black negroid people, just with pale skin, fair hair, and blue eyes. But you can still tell that they're a black person because their race is unchanged. You know, their race doesn't change because their race is defined by actually their features and not their skin tone. An East African who is albino looks no different than any other white person who is albino. Now, with this all in mind, you have to think, where do mixed people play a part in this? And honestly, I would say mixed people fall much more closely to Caucasians if you look at them most of the time. Sure, there are some mixed people. I would say like Obama is a negroid looking mixed person. So I guess he would fit the negroid option. Because he doesn't really look Caucasian, really, I don't think. He does have some Caucasian features, actually. But many of his features are still quite negroid, like his nose, for one. And his eyes. His eyes are almond-shaped, like a negroid's. His eyes are far apart, like a negroid. That's just what it is. He more so seems to fit in the negroid category to some extent. But he does have some features that people would say look mixed, like his lips, his brow ridge, his cheekbone structure isn't that high or round. But yeah, there are plenty of mixed people who do not have that phenotype, like for example Drake. Drake, to me, does have a Caucasian phenotype. And I don't understand why anyone wouldn't notice this, but he clearly does. Joe Canoa has more of a Caucasian phenotype, in my opinion. Who else? I would say someone like Mariah Carey has a Caucasian phenotype. Who else? I would say Kat Graham has a Caucasian phenotype. I know people wouldn't be shocked I would say that, but she does. Look at her face, and it says everything. You don't always have to look at skin tone with those type of things. If you look at particularly her face doesn't particularly have any African negroid features on her facial structure. So there's plenty of mixed people who fall into this category. And it's not really shocking. I would say more mixed people fit into the Caucasian structure than not. And this is why, if you ask a lot of mixed people what people usually think they are, they usually actually say that people tend to think that they are Middle Eastern descent. Oh, I've seen it across the board. Not having much to do with their skin tone and more having to do with their facial features. And many of the time, if they were darker, like Kat Graham's color, they're still thought to be maybe of Middle Eastern descent, or if they're lighter, like Mariah Carey, they're still thought to be maybe of some kind of ancestry of that background. Okay, so I think that, and even when they're not, sometimes they're included with East Africans. When I say Middle Eastern, I'm not talking about Arab either. I'm just saying what people will say. Sometimes people say Middle Eastern. They're more so meaning North African. They may even be meaning like Saharan, like Sudanese, North Sudanese, or like things of that nature. They could be meaning like East African in some cases. Some people are like that as well. But yeah, I'm saying in that category of things. But the thing is, all these types of categories of mistakes of people thinking they're these ethnicities all fall under the Caucasian race at the end of the day. And considering in history, people like the East Africans, people like the Fulani, like the Tibu, like the Tuareg, have all been included in the Caucasian race. And all these people are mixed race. They fall under the category of being between 25 and 75% Caucasian descent. So basically, my thing is, many of the people originally were basically perceived as 25, they were perceived as Caucasian, but they were 25% to 75% Caucasian ancestry. In that range. And I'm not saying completely, this is roughly, some people were around 21% Caucasian ancestry. My point is, these groups were considered Caucasian based off of their facial structure being specifically Caucasoid, basically. And some populations that were like within the 15% range were considered half Hamites. For example, people like the Tutsi and the Hema people have similar ancestry. I believe both are around the 15% range, maybe possibly a little bit less than that, in Caucasian ancestry. Full Caucasian ancestry might be much less than that, because they're saying that there's 17%, some tests have shown there's 17% of like Cushitic people. Well, Cushitic people are full Caucasian, so then on the bloodline, I'm saying. So then the bloodline that they would have would be around below 15%, you could say somewhere in the 10% range, maybe less. But they were considered half Hamites. They weren't considered full Hamites, so they weren't actually a part of the Caucasian race. They were considered Hamiticized Negroes, or something of that nature. So, this is what I'm just trying to point out, is that the people who had Caucasian ancestry were grouped with Caucasians as long as they were within that 20% range of having Caucasian ancestry, round a quarter. And when we say a quarter, honestly, a quarter extends all the way down to about 18%, because when you inherit from your grandparent, you can inherit as little as 18% of their ancestry. So if you have a Caucasian grandparent, you could be as little as 18% Caucasian. That's another story for another day, but I just wanted to point that out in this video. So I just wanted to point this out for the mixed race populations in America, because a lot of mixed race populations in America often say they are perceived as these Caucasian populations, specifically like Middle Eastern people, North African people, and Indian people, and if not that, East African people, which are all populations that were originally included with the Caucasian race. And it's just interesting because it's like, well, that's because the race of the Caucasian race originally included mixed race people all the way up to people who were only who are mixed with Caucasian ancestry, about a quarter of their DNA. And I'm pointing this out because, I never understood why people always say that black people who are mixed, or mixed people, or we could just say, are always perceived as black. Because it's like, last I checked, I didn't think anyone who was Middle Eastern or North African were actually perceived as black. And East Africans, honestly, though they are perceived as, in some capacity, black, they're also perceived as being of somehow, some way, mixed or different racially to other West African black people or Sub-Saharan black people. Central Africans, South Africans, East Africans tend to be placed different racially. The fact that a lot of mixed people get placed in these different populations and get perceived in these different populations, to me speaks to the fact that mixed people do not look black. They don't look like the original term of black, which is the Negroid race, largely. Now, like I said in the beginning of this video, some people do. Some people do have the broad nose, or the wider eye set, or the almond-shaped eyes. That's a gamble in genetics. But I'm saying, as far as the large amount of mixed people, I don't think they are, perceived as black. I think they're usually perceived as not completely the fair white person, of course, that we have associated with white purity. No, I'm not saying they're perceived as that, but they're definitely not perceived as black people largely. Many are perceived as brown Caucasians, basically. And brown Caucasians are basically people who are like North African, Middle Eastern, East African, and Indian people. They get put in that category. And the only reason they don't get put in this category is if they are open and honest about what they are. And people put so much pressure on them to be open and honest and say you don't like who you are, you don't like what you are or what you really are racially, and try and guilt them into saying that they're black, so then people can view them differently when they speak and say that they are, black. But the truth of this situation is that this is just to continue the subjugation of mixed people, because they have a view of blackness that's not basically in a negative way, and this is a major reason why people pressure mixed people to identify as black, basically, because they feel like if they don't, it doesn't keep the hierarchy. If people with tainted blood basically are allowed to identify with other ethnicities, particularly white. Now, the thing is with this whole situation is that, in all truth, though originally the Caucasian race included people who had mixtures of other races in them. And this is not just black people, per se. There's South Asians who are mixed as well and were included in the Caucasian race. But it's just very important to notice that this is very common among the black and white race. And it's very important to notice because a lot of people are mixed black and white. A lot of the black American population is mixed black and white, and a lot of biracials are mixed black and white. And the percentage is actually very comparable to people who were included in the Caucasian race. And the thing with this whole situation is that a large percentage of people in these populations would not meet that criterion on a cranial structural level. especially on the higher percentages of mixture. Like, for example, like what I was saying originally, like the Fula were included with the Caucasian race and have been for a long time, period, basically. And many people have included them, and they are, as far as the Caucasian race, a subset. So have the Tibu people been included in the Caucasian race, basically, according to the original definition of the Caucasian race. And even in this current day and age, they technically are included because in America, the U.S. Census includes people of native to Europe, native to the Middle East, and native to North Africa as basically Caucasian, of the Caucasian race, right? So because of that, one could say that that basically includes people as Caucasian who fit those criteria. And these people, the Tibu and the Fula, their percentages of Caucasian ancestry basically are around 30% for the Tibu, and for Fulas, it generally ranges, but on average, they are about 21% Caucasian ancestry. When we say Caucasian ancestry, I am referencing ancestry from Middle East, North Africa, or Europe, because these are the pure Caucasian people, basically. They're not admixed, usually. And at least historically, they weren't mixed either. Because a lot of people will bring forth people who call themselves Arab or call themselves North African who are mixed. But I'm not referencing that. I'm talking about on the genetic level, the full-blooded version of North African ancestry, Middle Eastern ancestry, and so forth. So anyway, my point in distinguishing this is basically just telling people that, when we talk about the percentages, it's not just specifically percentages, because, like I said, there are people who are 20 to 30% Caucasian ancestry from North Africa or Middle East in these areas, especially in the southern Saharan areas, who are still labeled under the Caucasian race because of cranial structure and Caucasian ancestry, even though that Caucasian ancestry is technically in the minority. And one could argue that people who are mixed with Caucasian ancestry, be it European for that matter, 20-30%, wouldn't they be included in the same category? To me, this is how I see it. It's like, if they are confused for people of these backgrounds, then wouldn't they be perceived as people from those backgrounds? And racially, they would be the same as those people of those backgrounds. So technically, they would be confused for someone who is a brown or Caucasian, basically. When I say that, I mean these type of people would be confused for being of Middle Eastern descent or North African descent, things of that nature. People who are perceived that way are not specifically perceived as white or black. When I say not white, I mean like not white European, okay? They are perceived as non-black people, though. So I think that when people fit those criteria of being mixed while having a cranial structure similar to Caucasians, then why shouldn't they be acknowledged as such? Why would one still try to call them black? Only because of the association of what black means in this country. And what black means in this country is a slave. That's what it really means. It means from Africa, from the African slave ships, from slavery, from a caste that is lower, from a caste that is the descendants of slaves. That's what it means. So what it really means, what the black race really means in America, is a class, is a level in society. But it doesn't actually mean anything to do with race, because if we looked at the original definition of race, the Negroid race had to do with facial features, hair texture, and skin tone, right? But mainly facial features, and not all Africans fit the skin tone requirement of the Negroid race, but every African that was considered Negroid fit the category of the facial features. And most likely, I think the hair texture. But the skin tone was not a prerequisite as much as the hair texture and facial structure. Those were the most obvious continuum and consistent features of the Negroid race. But in America, it's not. There are plenty of black Americans who do not have Negroid features, facial features. You know, there are plenty of black Americans who don't even have the skin tone, the facial features, or the hair. You know, and still they're considered black. And people will get shocked about this and say, like, people who are 70 to 80% sub-Saharan African ancestry, that these people should look exactly like sub-Saharan African Negroid people. But if you look at the racial designations, you'll see that the people who are within the 70 to 80% range are generally not placed with African Negroid racial subsets. They're actually put with Caucasian subsets of the racial categories long ago. See, the Caucasoid race was split up three ways. So there's European racial subsets, right? And there's the Mediterranean race. That's a subset of the Caucasian race. Inside that Mediterranean race, there is a subset of Semitic people, Semitic race, and there's a Hamitic race. Now, the Hamitic race is the people who are North Africans, Saharan people who are Southern Saharans, and East African people. Those are Hamitic people. Now, on the Hamitic people, there are some Hamitic people, the North Africans, which are really touted as the Hamitic people by our society standards because we believe in white racial purity. And because of that, that's why we can really only acknowledge North Africans, because North Africans aren't really mixed with sub-Saharan African ancestry. But the original definition of the Hamitic race, which is a sub-race of the Caucasian race, was originally including people who were of particularly more mixed ancestry. Say, the people in the southern Saharan areas were specifically within the 70 to 80% range when it comes to admixture of sub-Saharan African populations. And these populations were still included in the Caucasian race. Tibu people were often included in the Caucasian race, while being around 65 to 70% sub-Saharan African admixture. And Fulas were included with the Caucasian race, the subset of the sub-race of the Hamitic race, at a percentage range of around 75% to 80% admixture with sub-Saharan African ancestry. So both have a substantial amount of admixture. but we're still included with the Caucasian race. This is what I'm saying, and this is what I mean with Black Americans and mixed people. I think that mixed people, especially Black Americans, are hit and miss because some Black Americans are really, close to 100% Sub-Saharan African ancestry, and many of those people will have more commonality with Negroid people, obviously, because they're basically close to 100% Black Sub-Saharan African ancestry. But the Black Americans who aren't, many of them actually don't fit it categorically with the Negroid race because of the facial features, the hair texture, and so forth, Many of these people don't, but many may have dark skin, for example, and then people will assume that they are Black, even though race was mainly defined by facial features rather than skin tone. So that would actually be disregarded, and technically they would actually fit more with the others. And I think what's most important about this discussion is the fact that perception, because people will say they're perceived as Black, but the truth is they're actually perceived, many of those type of people are perceived very similarly to East African people, which we already went over the whole thing with East African people being a part of the Hamitic race, which is a subset of the Caucasian race. So that means that they would actually be phenotypically perceived as those people. Now, some people would say there's no distinction made between East Africans and West Africans. I don't think so. I think in our country we do see a difference between East Africans and Sub-Saharan Africans in phenotype. I've seen this across the board. I've seen Mexicans who will define East Africans different from Sub-Saharan Africans. I've seen Black Americans define the difference. I've seen white Americans define the difference. Everyone can tell the difference with an East African and someone who has typical Negroid features. Yet, somehow people want to ignore this difference when it comes to Black Americans who actually fit a phenotype that's more similar to East Africans. Especially while having Caucasian ancestry and basically being genetically similar to the populations that were included with the Caucasian race in the first place. So that's what I think of this whole situation. I think as far as biracials go, I definitely don't think they should be labeled with Black Americans for the most part. There are some biracials who look like Black Negroid people. This is a matter of genetics, so some people will have Negroid features, but many don't. And I don't think that they should be perceived as Black if they literally look like Caucasian people who are included in the Caucasian race and have more Caucasian ancestry than the very people we're including in the Caucasian race that were originally included in the Caucasian race, like in the 1700s. So this isn't a new concept, see? People who were raised as long ago included these people as Caucasian. And that's an important thing to note, that the only reason people decided to distinguish mixed people from Caucasian people was specifically for slavery and financial gain. Before that was done, the Caucasian race was specifically including mixed people, while the Black race was including only full Black people, or people who are very close to being fully Black. So that's what I have to say on that topic, basically. I think we need to get our eyes and our heads and our minds out of the whole white purity thing and go back to the original definition of what Caucasian really included, which it actually included mixed race people. Fully Black people were included with the Negroid race, and generally that was it. So that's all I have to say in this video. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe, comment down below, and have a great day. Bye, guys.